the darkest hour of World War II, when hope seemed lost and freedom hung by a thread, one woman's courage would defy every rule of warfare. She wasn't a trained soldier, wasn't part of any elite unit, and had never fired a gun in anger. Yet she would accomplish what entire armies could not: penetrate the most heavily guarded fortress in Nazi-occupied Europe and rescue a captured Allied general whose knowledge could change the course of the war. This is not a Hollywood fantasy. This is not a work of fiction. This is the true story of Elena Marchetti, a 28-year-old resistance fighter who walked alone into the lion's den, armed with nothing but her wits, her courage, and an unbreakable determination to bring a hero home. What she accomplished in those 7 terrifying days behind enemy lines would become legend, but the price she paid would haunt her forever. Some missions are impossible. Some people make them possible anyway. The morning mist clung to the Alpine valleys like a gray shroud when General Marcus Henderson's convoy rolled into the ambush that would change everything. It was October 15, 1943, and the Allied push through northern Italy had been gaining momentum for weeks. Henderson, a decorated British officer with 25 years of military experience, was traveling from his headquarters in Florence to coordinate a crucial offensive that could potentially open the path to Rome. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles: a lead reconnaissance jeep, Henderson's staff car with its distinctive Allied markings, and a trailing supply truck carrying communications equipment. The general sat in the back seat of his armored Humber, reviewing battle plans, while his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant James Morrison, sat beside him pointing out landmarks on a tactical map. Neither man noticed the unusual silence that had fallen over the mountain pass. High above in the rocky outcroppings, German snipers had been waiting since before dawn. The Wehrmacht intelligence network had somehow intercepted Henderson's travel plans, and they knew exactly when and where to strike. What they hadn't anticipated was how valuable their prize would become once they realized who they had captured. The first shot shattered the morning quiet like thunder. The lead jeep's driver slumped forward as his vehicle careened off the narrow mountain road and plunged into a ravine. Almost immediately, machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions, turning the peaceful mountain pass into a hellscape of screaming metal and burning fuel. Henderson's driver, Sergeant William Brooks, was a veteran who had survived the North African campaign. Without hesitation, he threw the heavy staff car into reverse, tires squealing against the rocky road surface as he attempted to back out of the kill zone. But it was already too late. A well-placed anti-tank round struck the engine block, and the vehicle ground to a halt in a cloud of steam and smoke. "Get out! Move!" Henderson shouted to his aide, but Morrison was already slumped against the window, blood trickling from a head wound. The general grabbed his service pistol and kicked open the car door, rolling into the drainage ditch beside the road. Bullets whined overhead as he assessed the situation with the cold calculation that had made him one of Britain's most respected field commanders. The ambush was perfectly executed. German soldiers were emerging from concealed positions along both sides of the pass, their distinctive gray uniforms and coal scuttle helmets clearly visible now that stealth was no longer necessary. Henderson counted at least 30 men, far more than his small escort could handle even under the best circumstances. But these were far from the best circumstances. Sergeant Brooks had managed to escape the burning staff car and was now crouched behind a boulder, returning fire with his Thompson submachine gun. The surviving members of the reconnaissance team were doing the same from their overturned jeep, but their ammunition wouldn't last long. Henderson knew that surrender was inevitable, but every minute they held out was another minute for potential reinforcements to arrive. That hope died when he saw the German officer approaching under a white flag. The man was tall and lean, with the bearing of a professional soldier and the Iron Cross gleaming on his uniform. He stopped 30 meters away and called out in perfect English, "General Henderson, I am Oberst Klaus Richter of the 24th Panzer Division. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Order your men to lay down their arms, and I guarantee they will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." Henderson's mind raced. How did they know his identity? His uniform bore no insignia of rank, and his presence in this sector was supposed to be classified. Someone had betrayed them, but there would be time to worry about that later. Right now, he had to think about the lives of his men. "What assurance do I have of proper treatment?" Henderson called back, still keeping his head low as sporadic gunfire continued around them. "The word of a German officer," Richter replied. "Your reputation precedes you, General. The victory at Monte Cassino, your breakthrough at the Gothic Line. You have conducted yourself with honor in this war. You will receive the same in return." The compliment was unexpected and somehow made the situation even more surreal. Henderson looked at his remaining men, saw the resignation in their eyes, and knew the fight was over. Sergeant Brooks was clutching his shoulder where a bullet had found its mark, and the reconnaissance team was down to their last magazine. Continuing to resist would only result in unnecessary casualties. "Very well, Oberst Richter," Henderson called out. "We surrender." The general stood slowly, his hands raised, his Webley revolver dangling from one finger by its trigger guard. One by one, his men followed suit, emerging from their meager cover with their weapons held high. The sudden silence was almost deafening after the chaos of the firefight. Richter approached with a squad of soldiers, their weapons trained on the prisoners but their discipline evident in every movement. When he reached Henderson, the German officer actually came to attention and offered a crisp salute before accepting the general's sidearm. "General Henderson, you are now a prisoner of the German Reich. Your personal effects will be inventoried and returned to you when possible. Is there anything you require for your wounded?" Henderson gestured toward Morrison, who was conscious now but clearly suffering from a concussion. "My aide needs medical attention, and Sergeant Brooks has taken a bullet in the shoulder. My medic will see to them immediately." Richter's professionalism was almost unsettling. This wasn't the behavior Henderson had expected from Nazi soldiers, but he reminded himself that not every German was a Nazi, and the Wehrmacht still maintained some traditions of military courtesy. As the prisoners were being secured, Henderson overheard radio chatter between Richter and his headquarters. The German officer was speaking too quietly to make out most of the conversation, but certain words came through clearly: high-value target, immediate extraction, and most ominously, special interrogation facility. The general's blood ran cold. He knew what those phrases meant in German military terminology. He wasn't being taken to a standard prisoner of war camp. Whatever his destination, it would be a place where the Geneva Convention was more suggestion than law, and where his knowledge of Allied plans and capabilities would be extracted by any means necessary. The journey to capture had taken less than an hour, but Henderson knew that his war was far from over. In fact, it was about to become much more dangerous than any battlefield he had ever faced. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in a small village outside Milan, Elena Marchetti was hanging laundry on a line behind her family's modest stone house when she heard the news that would change her life forever. Her brother Giuseppe came running up the cobblestone street, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Elena, have you heard? The British general has been captured. General Henderson, the one who broke through at Monte Cassino. The Germans have him." Elena dropped the wet sheet she had been hanging and turned to face her brother. At 28, she was a striking woman with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see everything around her. But it wasn't her beauty that had made her valuable to the Italian resistance movement. It was her mind, sharp as a blade and utterly fearless when it came to protecting the people she cared about. "When? Where?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. "This morning, in the mountains near Bolzano. The whole convoy was wiped out. Giuseppe heard it from Marco, who heard it from someone in the German headquarters in Milan. They're calling it a major intelligence coup." Elena's hands clenched into fists. She had never met General Henderson personally, but she knew his reputation. More importantly, she knew what his capture meant for the war effort in Italy. The general had been coordinating the Allied advance, and he possessed detailed knowledge of upcoming operations, troop movements, and strategic plans. In German hands, that information could cripple the liberation of Italy and cost thousands of Allied lives. But there was something else, something more personal, that made this news cut deep into her heart. Giuseppe didn't know it yet, and Elena prayed he never would, but she had been the one who provided the intelligence that put General Henderson in that mountain pass at exactly the wrong time. 3 weeks earlier, she had been captured during a sabotage operation against a German supply depot. Under interrogation, she had been forced to reveal details about Allied movements to protect the lives of other resistance members. She had thought the information was too general to be useful, but now she realized that the Germans had been far more clever than she had given them credit for. She had inadvertently helped set the trap that captured one of the most important Allied commanders in the Mediterranean theater. The guilt was like a physical weight in her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Helena, are you all right?" "You look pale," Giuseppe said, reaching out to touch her arm. She forced herself to smile and nodded. "I'm fine, just thinking about what this means for our work here." But she wasn't thinking about the resistance movement in general. She was thinking about something much more dangerous and desperate. She was thinking about redemption, about making amends for her unwitting betrayal, about doing something that had never been done before in the history of warfare. She was thinking about going behind enemy lines to bring General Henderson home. As evening fell over the village, Elena sat alone in her room, staring at a map of northern Italy that she had hidden beneath her mattress. She traced the routes she knew, marked the locations of German strongholds, and began to formulate a plan that everyone would tell her was suicide.
But Elena Marchetti had never been one to listen to everyone.
She had never been one to accept that something was impossible just because it had never been done before. And as she studied that map by candlelight, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could pull off the impossible. The question wasn't whether she could do it. The question was whether she could live with herself if she didn't try. Elena's first instinct was to contact her handler in the resistance network, but she quickly dismissed that idea. What she was contemplating went far beyond the scope of typical partisan operations. This wasn't about sabotaging a supply line or gathering intelligence on German troop movements. This was about penetrating the most secure military installation in German-occupied Italy and extracting a high-value prisoner whose captors would shoot him before allowing him to escape. For 3 days, she lived with the secret burning inside her chest while she gathered information through the network of contacts she had built over 2 years of resistance work. What she learned made the task seem even more impossible than she had first imagined. General Henderson hadn't been taken to a standard prisoner of war facility. Instead, he had been transported to Schloss Adlerhorst, a medieval castle that the Germans had converted into a maximum security interrogation center high in the South Tyrolean Alps. The fortress sat on a rocky promontory surrounded by steep cliffs on 3 sides, with only one narrow mountain road providing access. The 4th side overlooked a 1,000-foot drop into a glacial valley. The castle housed approximately 200 German personnel, including a full company of SS guards, interrogation specialists from the Abwehr military intelligence service, and technical staff who operated the sophisticated communication equipment that linked the facility to Berlin. The entire complex was surrounded by multiple layers of security: electrified fences, guard towers equipped with searchlights and machine guns, and patrols of trained attack dogs. But perhaps most daunting of all was the castle's location itself. Even if someone could somehow penetrate the security and reach Henderson, getting him out would require traversing 50 miles of hostile territory, crawling with German patrols, checkpoints, and collaborators eager to earn rewards for turning in Allied fugitives. Elena studied every detail she could obtain about the facility, the surrounding terrain, and the German security procedures. She memorized guard schedules, learned about the personalities of key personnel, and even discovered that the castle's commandant, SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Kessler, had a weakness for fine wine and French literature. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that a traditional military rescue operation would be doomed to failure. The Allies could never mount a successful assault on such a heavily defended position without massive casualties, and by the time they organized such an operation, Henderson would have been thoroughly interrogated and probably transferred to a more secure location deeper in German territory. But there was another way, a possibility so audacious that its very impossibility might make it feasible. If Elena couldn't fight her way into Schloss Adlerhorst, perhaps she could walk in the front door. The idea came to her while she was reading an intelligence report about German personnel transfers. The castle regularly received new staff members, particularly administrative personnel and specialists brought in for specific interrogation cases. These transfers were often arranged on short notice, and the chaos of wartime bureaucracy meant that paperwork was frequently incomplete or delayed. Elena had one crucial advantage that no male resistance fighter could claim: her appearance. With her dark hair, olive complexion, and ability to speak fluent German with a convincing Austrian accent, she could potentially pass as a Volksdeutsche, an ethnic German from outside the Reich proper. Many such women had been recruited to work in German facilities throughout occupied Europe, particularly in clerical and translation roles. But creating a false identity convincing enough to gain access to a maximum security installation would require resources and expertise that Elena didn't possess. She needed help, and there was only one person she trusted enough to approach with such a desperate plan. Father Antonio Benedetti was the parish priest in a village 15 miles from Elena's home, but his religious duties were merely a cover for his real work as one of the most effective forgers and document specialists in the Italian resistance. Elena had worked with him before on smaller operations, and she knew that he had contacts throughout the underground network that stretched from Milan to the Swiss border. She found him in his small workshop hidden behind a false wall in the church rectory, hunched over a drafting table, where he was carefully aging what appeared to be a German military identification card. The priest was a small, precise man in his 60s with gentle eyes that belied the dangerous work he performed. "Elena, my child," he said without looking up from his work, "I was wondering when you might come to see me. I've heard whispers about your recent preoccupations." "Father,"
I need your help with something. Something that no one else would even consider attempting. Benedetti set down his pen and studied her face with the intensity of a man who had learned to read souls. This is about the British general, isn't it? About Schloss Adlerhorst.
Elena wasn't surprised that he had already guessed her purpose. The priest seemed to know everything that happened in the resistance network, often before the people involved knew it themselves.
You think I'm crazy, she said. I think you're desperate. And desperate people sometimes accomplish impossible things.
Before we discuss the details of whatever you're planning, I want you to tell me why. Why are you willing to die for a man you've never met? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge.
Elena had been asking herself the same thing for days, and she still wasn't entirely certain of the answer, but she owed this man honesty, even if the truth was painful to admit. Because it's my fault he was captured, she said quietly. 3 weeks ago, when the Germans had me, I told them things.
Not everything, but enough. I thought I was being clever, giving them information that couldn't hurt anyone.
But I was wrong. Benedetti nodded slowly. And now you believe that rescuing General Henderson will somehow balance the scales of justice. I believe that if I don't try, I'll never be able to live with myself. And I believe that his knowledge could save thousands of Allied lives if the Germans don't extract it first. The priest was quiet for a long moment, studying Elena's face as if trying to peer into her soul. Finally, he spoke. What you're contemplating isn't just dangerous, Elena. It's a form of suicide.
The odds against success are astronomical, but not zero.
No, he admitted. Not zero. Which means I'm probably going to help you, God forgive me. Over the next 4 hours, Elena outlined her plan while Benedetti poked holes in it, refined it, and gradually helped her transform a desperate impulse into something that might actually have a chance of succeeding. The identity he would create for her would be that of Ingrid Hoffmann, a 30-year-old Austrian translator who had been working for the German administration in occupied Yugoslavia before being transferred to northern Italy for special duties. Her background would be detailed enough to stand up to casual scrutiny, but vague enough to explain any gaps in her knowledge of recent events. Benedetti's contacts in the forging network would provide not just identity documents, but also the kind of personal effects that would make her cover story convincing: family photographs, letters from fictional relatives, even a well-worn copy of Goethe's poetry with margin notes in German script. But the most crucial element of the plan was timing. According to intelligence reports, Schloss Adlerhorst was expecting a new batch of personnel transfers within the next 2 weeks. Benedetti's network had already identified a legitimate transfer order for a translator that could be intercepted and modified. Elena would simply take the place of someone who would never arrive. The hardest part won't be getting in, Benedetti warned as they finalized the details. It will be maintaining your cover long enough to locate the general and figure out how to extract him. You'll be surrounded by people whose job it is to detect deception, and any mistake could expose not just you but potentially compromise other operations. Elena understood the risks, but she also understood that waiting would only make the situation worse. Every day Henderson remained in German custody was another day for his interrogators to break down his resistance and extract crucial intelligence. If she was going to act, it had to be soon. How long will it take you to prepare everything, she asked. 5 days, perhaps. 6. But Elena, once you walk through those gates, you'll be completely on your own. The resistance network can get you close to the castle, but after that, we won't be able to help you. If something goes wrong, if your cover is blown, there will be no rescue operation. Do you understand what that means? She met his gaze steadily. It means I'll have to succeed. As Elena prepared to leave, Benedetti caught her arm gently. There's one more thing we need to discuss. Even if you somehow manage to reach General Henderson and convince him that you're there to help, how do you plan to get him out? The man has been in captivity for days. He may be injured, drugged, or psychologically broken. He might not even be capable of making an escape attempt. It was a question that Elena had been dreading because she didn't have a good answer. Her plan had focused entirely on infiltration, on getting close enough to assess the situation and look for opportunities. But Benedetti was right to press her on the extraction phase, because that would be the most dangerous part of all. I don't know, she admitted. I'm hoping that once I'm inside, once I can see the layout and understand the security procedures, I'll be able to identify a weakness we can exploit. That's not a plan, Elena. That's a prayer. Then I guess I'll be praying a lot over the next few weeks. Despite his concerns, Benedetti squeezed her shoulder with something that might have been paternal pride. Your courage is extraordinary, my dear. I only hope it's enough. As Elena walked back to her village through the moonlit countryside, she tried not to think about all the ways her plan could go wrong. Instead, she focused on the one thing that gave her strength. The knowledge that somewhere in a fortress high in the mountains, a good man was suffering because of information she had provided to his enemies. She had helped put General Henderson in that prison. Now she was going to get him out, or die trying. The next morning, she began the most intensive preparation of her life. She practiced her Austrian accent until it became natural, memorized the details of Ingrid Hoffmann's fictional background until she could recite them in her sleep, and studied German military protocols until she understood the bureaucracy better than many actual German soldiers. But perhaps most importantly, she began the psychological preparation for what lay ahead. She was about to walk into the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by people who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. She would have to be perfect in her deception, flawless in her performance, and absolutely ruthless in her determination.
Elena Marchetti, Italian resistance fighter, would have to disappear completely. In her place would stand Ingrid Hoffmann, loyal servant of the German Reich, ready to do whatever was necessary to serve her adopted country's war effort. Was, she reflected grimly, going to be the performance of her life, and probably the last performance she would ever give. The mountain road to Schloss Adlerhorst wound through pine forests and rocky outcroppings like a serpent climbing toward heaven. Elena sat in the back of the German staff car, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the terror coursing through her veins. She was no longer Elena Marchetti. She was Ingrid Hoffmann, and Ingrid would be nervous but not terrified about her new assignment. The journey from the train station in Bolzano had taken 2 hours, during which her driver, a middle-aged Wehrmacht sergeant named Klaus, had tried repeatedly to engage her in conversation. Elena had responded politely, but distantly, explaining that she was tired from her journey from Vienna and anxious about her new duties.
The performance felt natural now after 6 days of intensive preparation with Father Benedetti. Her papers had passed their first test at the train station, where a suspicious SS officer had examined her transfer orders with particular attention to the official seals and signatures.
Benedetti's forgery work had been flawless, but Elena had still held her breath for the 30 seconds it took the man to compare her documents against some kind of master list. When he finally handed them back with a curt nod, she had allowed herself to believe that the impossible might actually be possible.
As the staff car rounded a final bend in the mountain road, Elena caught her first glimpse of Schloss Adlerhorst and felt her courage waver for a moment. The medieval castle perched on its rocky outcropping looked exactly like something out of a Gothic nightmare, with its towering walls, imposing battlements, and the red and black Nazi flag snapping in the mountain wind.
But it was the modern additions that truly intimidated her. The electrified fencing, the guard towers bristling with machine guns, the searchlights that would turn night into day, and the carefully positioned obstacles that would channel any approaching vehicle through predetermined killing zones. This wasn't just a fortress, it was a death trap for anyone foolish enough to challenge it. Impressive, isn't it? Sergeant Klaus said, noticing her stare. The Führer himself approved the defensive modifications. No one gets in or out of Adlerhorst without authorization from Berlin. Elena forced herself to smile. It certainly looks secure. I feel honored to be assigned here. What kind of work will you be doing, if you don't mind me asking? This was the question she had been dreading. Her cover story was solid, but it required her to walk a careful line between being helpful and being too specific about her fictional expertise. Translation services, primarily. I'm told there are some important interrogations requiring specialized linguistic skills. Klaus nodded with the satisfaction of a man who had guessed correctly. The British general, then. I heard they brought in someone special for that case. Elena's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm not privy to specific assignments yet, Sergeant. I'm sure I'll be briefed properly once I arrive. The car approached the outer checkpoint, where 2 SS guards emerged from a concrete bunker to examine their papers.
Elena noticed that Klaus showed no surprise at the security measures, suggesting that even regular personnel deliveries were treated with extreme caution. The first guard, a young man with the hard eyes of a combat veteran, studied Elena's documents while his partner examined the vehicle's undercarriage with a mirror mounted on a long handle. Standard procedure for preventing infiltration by explosives or stowaways. Fraulein Hoffmann, the guard said in clipped German. You will proceed to the main entrance for processing. Your luggage will be searched and you will be issued temporary quarters until your security clearance is verified. Temporary quarters? Elena asked, injecting just the right note of concern into her voice. I was told my assignment was confirmed. All new personnel undergo a 48-hour orientation period. The guard explained. Standard security protocol. Your permanent quarters will be assigned once you've been cleared for active duty. This was an unwelcome development that Elena hadn't anticipated. 2 days of close scrutiny would make maintaining her cover much more difficult, especially if they assigned her a roommate or subjected her to intensive questioning about her background. The staff car proceeded through 2 more checkpoints before reaching the castle's main courtyard.
Elena had studied architectural drawings of the medieval structure, but seeing it from the inside was still overwhelming. The central keep rose 5 stories above the courtyard, its ancient stone walls now bristling with radio antennas and modern electrical installations. German personnel moved briskly across the courtyard, their uniforms indicating a mix of Wehrmacht, SS, and civilian specialists. Elena noticed several people who appeared to be prisoners or forced laborers, distinguishable by their shabby clothing and the way other personnel ignored them completely. An SS Unterscharführer approached the car as Elena stepped out, his manner suggesting that escort duty wasn't his favorite assignment. Fräulein Hoffmann? I am Unterscharführer Beck. I will conduct your initial orientation. Beck was perhaps 25 years old, with the pale complexion and soft build of someone who spent most of his time indoors. Elena classified him immediately as a bureaucrat rather than a combatant, which might work to her advantage if she needed to manipulate him. Thank you, Unterscharführer. I appreciate your assistance. Follow me, please. We will begin with a security briefing, and then proceed to your temporary quarters. As they walked across the courtyard, Elena memorized everything she could see: the locations of guard positions, the layout of the main buildings, and the patterns of personnel movement. Most importantly, she noticed a separate wing of the castle that appeared to be under heavier security than the rest, with additional guards and what looked like reinforced doors. The security briefing took place in a small conference room decorated with portraits of Nazi leadership and detailed maps of the surrounding region. Beck droned through a list of regulations covering everything from meal schedules to communication protocols, but Elena paid particular attention to the sections dealing with restricted areas and emergency procedures. The interrogation wing is absolutely forbidden to all personnel without specific authorization, Beck explained, confirming Elena's suspicion about the heavily guarded section she had noticed. This includes cleaning staff, maintenance personnel, and administrative workers. Violation of this restriction is punishable by immediate transfer to a combat unit. Elena nodded dutifully while making mental notes about the threat implicit in Beck's warning. Being sent to a combat unit was essentially a death sentence for someone in his position. What about translation services? She asked. Surely interpreters would need access to interrogation facilities. Translation services are provided on a case-by-case basis, with explicit authorization from the Commandant's office. You will receive specific instructions if and when your services are required. After the briefing, Beck escorted her to a small room on the 3rd floor of the main keep. The quarters were Spartan but clean, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a small window that offered a view of the surrounding mountains. More importantly, it was a private room, which would give her some freedom to plan her next moves without constant observation. Meals are served in the main hall at designated times, Beck explained as he handed her a key to the room. You are expected to attend orientation sessions tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Do you have any questions? Elena had dozens of questions, but none that Ingrid Hoffmann would ask. No. Unterscharführer, thank you for your assistance. After Beck left, Elena spent several minutes examining her room for hidden listening devices or observation points. She found none, but that didn't mean they didn't exist. German intelligence services were known for their sophisticated surveillance techniques. Her luggage had been delivered and searched, but apparently nothing had raised suspicion. Benedetti's attention to detail had extended even to the contents of her suitcase, which contained exactly the sort of personal effects a real Austrian translator would bring to a new assignment. As evening fell, Elena made her way to the main hall for dinner. The castle's dining facility was a mixture of medieval grandeur and modern utility, with long wooden tables arranged beneath ancient tapestries depicting scenes of conquest and glory. About 60 people were present for the evening meal, representing every level of the facility's hierarchy from senior officers to administrative staff. Elena chose a seat at a table occupied primarily by civilian specialists and junior officers, the sort of people who might be willing to share information without becoming suspicious of her questions. She introduced herself as Ingrid and explained that she was new to the facility, which prompted a general discussion of life at Schloss Adlerhorst. You've come at an interesting time, said a young man who introduced himself as Dr. Weber, a psychologist attached to the interrogation staff. We're dealing with a particularly challenging case at the moment.
Elena forced herself to show only polite interest. Challenging how? A high-ranking British officer.
Very experienced, very disciplined. He's resisted conventional interrogation techniques for over a week now. Perhaps he has nothing useful to tell you, suggested a woman named Anna who worked in the communications center. Weber shook his head. Oh, he has information. Detailed knowledge of Allied plans and capabilities. The question is whether we can extract it before Berlin decides to transfer him to a more specialized facility. Elena felt a chill at the implication. If Henderson was transferred to a concentration camp or a Gestapo facility, He would disappear forever into the Nazi system of state terror. Her window for action was even smaller than she had realized. "Have you tried using a translator?" she asked carefully. "Sometimes communication barriers can create the impression of resistance when the problem is actually linguistic." "Interesting suggestion," Weber mused. "The prisoner speaks adequate German, but perhaps there are nuances we're missing. I'll mention it to Oberfuhrer Kessler." Elena excused herself from dinner as soon as politely possible and returned to her room to process what she had learned. The good news was that Henderson was apparently still in the castle and still resisting interrogation. The bad news was that his time was running out and her own position was more precarious than she had hoped. She needed to locate Henderson's exact whereabouts, assess his condition, and identify potential escape routes, all while maintaining her cover as a loyal German employee. And she had perhaps days rather than weeks to accomplish all of this. As she lay in her narrow bed listening to the mountain wind howl around the castle walls, Elena tried to quiet the voice in her head that kept whispering that she had made a terrible mistake. She was one woman alone in a fortress full of enemies trying to accomplish something that an entire army would struggle to achieve. But she had come this far. She had walked through the front door of the most secured German facility in northern Italy, and no one suspected her true identity. If she could maintain that deception for just a little longer, she might actually have a chance to find General Henderson and figure out how to get him home. The hardest part was supposed to be behind her. As Elena finally drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was just beginning. Outside her window, the searchlights swept back and forth across the courtyard in their endless vigilance, and somewhere in the heavily guarded wing of the castle, General Marcus Henderson sat in his cell and wondered if anyone in the world even knew he was still alive. Elena's opportunity came sooner than she had dared to hope, but in a way that filled her with dread. On her second morning at Schloss Adlerhorst, she was summoned to Oberfuhrer Kessler's office with less than 10 minutes' notice. As she hurried through the castle's corridors, her mind raced through every possible reason for the meeting, most of them ending with her exposure and execution. The commandant's office occupied a corner of the castle's main keep, with tall windows that offered a commanding view of the surrounding mountains. Kessler himself was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire adult life in military service. His uniform was immaculate, his desk precisely organized, and his pale blue eyes seemed to miss nothing. "Fraulein Hoffmann," he said as Elena was escorted into the office. "Please sit down. I understand you have experience with interrogation support services." Elena forced herself to remain calm as she took the offered chair. "Yes, Oberfuhrer. I worked extensively with military intelligence in Yugoslavia, primarily translating captured documents and providing linguistic analysis during prisoner interviews." "Excellent. I have a special assignment that requires your particular skills." Kessler opened a folder on his desk and studied its contents for a moment. "We are interrogating a high-value prisoner, a British general whose cooperation has been limited. Dr. Casas." Weber suggested that perhaps fresh perspectives might prove beneficial. "I would be honored to assist, sir. The prisoner speaks adequate German, but he is clearly withholding information. I want you to observe his next interrogation session and provide your assessment of his psychological state and potential vulnerabilities. Your background in linguistic analysis may help us identify when he is being evasive or deceptive." Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of terror and elation. She was about to be given exactly what she had come here to find: access to General Henderson. But the circumstances couldn't have been worse. She would be expected to help her enemies break down the man she had risked everything to save. "When would you like me to begin, Oberfuhrer?" "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. Hauptmann Fischer will brief you on the case details beforehand." Kessler closed the folder and fixed Elena with a direct stare. "I should mention that this assignment requires the highest level of discretion. The prisoner's identity and the nature of his knowledge are classified at the highest levels. Any breach of security would be considered treason." "I understand completely, sir. You have my word that I will maintain absolute confidentiality." "Good. Report to the interrogation wing at 1:30. Fischer will be expecting you." As Elena left Kessler's office, she felt as if she were walking through a dream. In trying to gain access to Henderson, she had stumbled into the worst possible scenario, being forced to participate in his interrogation. But perhaps there was an opportunity hidden within the nightmare. If she could observe the security procedures, learn the layout of the detention facilities, and even communicate with Henderson directly, she might discover the chance she needed. Hauptmann Fischer turned out to be a thin, nervous man in his 40s
whose handshake was damp with perspiration. He met Elena in a small briefing room adjacent to the interrogation wing, and his manner suggested that he was under considerable pressure to produce results. The prisoner is General Marcus Henderson, commander of the British Eighth Army's advance elements in northern Italy. Fisher began, consulting a thick file.
He was captured 12 days ago and has been extremely uncooperative. We believe he possesses detailed information about upcoming Allied offensives, troop dispositions, and strategic objectives. This is the Book of Taking Fells.
Elena nodded professionally while memorizing every detail. What interrogation techniques have been employed so far? Standard psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, alternating periods of isolation, and intensive questioning.
We've also tried offering improved conditions in exchange for cooperation. Fisher's tone suggested frustration with the lack of progress. The man is remarkably disciplined.
He provides only name, rank, and service number exactly as specified in the Geneva Convention. Has physical coercion been authorized? Not yet. Berlin wants him intact for potential prisoner exchanges. But patience is wearing thin. If we can't produce results soon, the case may be transferred to more specialized facilities. Elena understood the euphemism. The Gestapo had methods that made Wehrmacht interrogations look gentle by comparison. I'll need to review his psychological profile before the session, she said. Fisher handed her another folder. This contains everything we've compiled about his background, military service, and observed behavior patterns. You have 30 minutes to study it. Elena spent the time memorizing not just Henderson's official biography but also the detailed notes about his conduct in captivity. The picture that emerged was of a man under tremendous stress but still fighting to protect the information his captors wanted. He had lost weight, showed signs of sleep deprivation, and occasionally displayed symptoms of depression, but his core resistance remained intact. At 2 o'clock, Fisher escorted her through a series of security doors into the interrogation wing. The change in atmosphere was immediate and oppressive. The medieval stone walls had been modified with modern soundproofing. Harsh fluorescent lighting replaced the natural illumination from windows, and the air carried the subtle but unmistakable smell of fear and desperation. Cell Block 3 is reserved for special cases, Fisher explained as they walked down a narrow corridor lined with heavy steel doors. The prisoner is being held in isolation to prevent any possibility of communication with other detainees. They stopped at a door marked only with the number 7. Through a small observation window, Elena caught her first glimpse of General Marcus Henderson, and her heart nearly broke at what she saw. The man sitting on the edge of a narrow cot bore little resemblance to the confident military commander whose photographs appeared regularly in Allied newspapers. Henderson had clearly lost significant weight during his captivity, and his face was gaunt with exhaustion. His uniform had been replaced with gray prison clothes that hung loosely on his diminished frame, but his posture remained erect, and when he looked up at the sound of footsteps in the corridor, Elena saw that his eyes still held the intelligence and determination that had made him one of Britain's most respected field commanders. "We'll be conducting the session in Interrogation Room 2, Fisher said, leading Elena to a chamber furnished with a simple table and several chairs. The walls were bare except for a large portrait of Adolf Hitler and a German flag. I want you to observe carefully and make notes about his responses to different questioning approaches." 20 minutes later, 2 guards escorted Henderson into the room. He walked steadily despite obvious fatigue, and when he saw Elena, his expression showed only mild curiosity. There was no sign that he recognized her as anything other than another German official. "Please sit down, General," Fisher said in English, gesturing toward a chair opposite the table. "This is Fraulein Hoffmann, a specialist in linguistic analysis. She will be observing our discussion today." Henderson took the offered seat and folded his hands on the table. "Good afternoon, Captain," he said to Fisher, deliberately using a lower rank than the German officer's actual title. "I trust you're well." The small act of defiance wasn't lost on Elena. Despite everything he had endured, Henderson was still fighting in whatever way he could. Fisher ignored the slight and opened his file folder. "General, we've discussed this many times. Your cooperation would be in everyone's best interest. The war is going poorly for your country, and continued resistance only prolongs unnecessary suffering. My name is Henderson, Marcus James. My rank is General. My service number is 4A 7B 2C 8D. Henderson replied in the same steady tone he had obviously used dozens of times before. "Yes, we know all that," Fisher said with obvious irritation. "What we want to know is the timing and objectives of the Allied spring offensive. When will Montgomery begin his advance toward the Po Valley?" What are the primary strategic targets? Henderson repeated his name, rank, and service number. Alina watched the exchange with growing desperation.
She was supposed to be analyzing Henderson's responses for signs of weakness, but all she could see was a man slowly being ground down by an ordeal that could only end in his death, or the betrayal of everything he had sworn to protect. Fisher tried several different approaches over the next hour, alternating between promises of better treatment and veiled threats about what might happen if Berlin lost patience. Henderson's responses never varied from the basic identification required under the Geneva Convention.
Perhaps we should try a different approach, Elena found herself saying as Fisher's frustration became obvious. Both men looked at her with surprise. Fisher gestured for her to continue.
General, Elena said in heavily accented English, you are obviously an educated man.
Surely you understand that this war cannot continue indefinitely. Wouldn't it serve everyone's interest to find a reasonable solution? For the first time since entering the room, Henderson looked directly at her.
There was something in his gaze that made Elena's breath catch, a flicker of recognition or understanding that was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. My name is Henderson, Marcus James, he said quietly.
My rank is general. My service number is 4A, 7B, 2C, 8D. But as he spoke the familiar words, his eyes held Elena's for just a moment longer than necessary, and she saw something there that made her pulse race.
Wasn't recognition of her identity, but rather recognition of something else. Some quality or characteristic that didn't quite fit with his image of a German interrogator. The session continued for another 30 minutes, but Elena's mind was racing with possibilities. Henderson was clearly more observant than his captors realized. He had noticed something about her that aroused his suspicion or perhaps his hope. When the guards finally escorted him back to his cell, Henderson paused for just an instant as he passed Elena's chair. To anyone else, it would have looked like simple fatigue, but Elena caught the slight movement of his hand and realized he had dropped something.
After Fisher and the guards had left, Elena pretended to organize her notes while carefully retrieving the small piece of fabric that Henderson had torn from his sleeve. When she unfolded it, she found a message written in tiny letters with what looked like blood from a small wound on his finger.
Trust no one. They know about Avalanche. RF coming. Hold position. Elena's hands trembled as she read the message. Henderson was telling her that the Germans had extracted information about Operation Avalanche, the Allied code name for the upcoming offensive operations in Italy.
But more importantly, he was indicating that rescue was coming and that she should maintain her position. But how could Henderson know about a rescue operation?
And more critically, how had he identified her as someone who could be trusted with such information? As Elena walked back to her quarters, her mind churned with new questions and possibilities. Henderson's message suggested that her mission wasn't as hopeless as it had seemed, but it also indicated that time was running out faster than she had realized.
If the Germans had broken Henderson enough to extract information about Allied operations, then his value as a source of intelligence was rapidly diminishing. Soon, they would either transfer him to a more secure location or simply eliminate him as a liability.
Elena had perhaps days, maybe hours, to figure out how to get Henderson out of Schloss Adlerhorst. And now she knew that she might not be the only one trying to save him. The question was whether whoever was coming would arrive in time and whether they would be able to accomplish what she had so far failed to achieve. Elena folded Henderson's message carefully and hid it in the binding of her journal. Whatever happened next, she was no longer operating in complete isolation. But that realization brought its own dangers. If there was a rescue operation in the works, and if German intelligence discovered it, then both Henderson and Elena would be dead long before any help could arrive. The game had just become much more complicated, and the stakes had never been higher. The answer to Elena's questions came at 3 o'clock in the morning, delivered by the distinctive sound of aircraft engines approaching from the south. She was jolted awake by the sudden wailing of air raid sirens, followed immediately by the thunder of anti-aircraft guns opening fire from positions around the castle. Elena rushed to her window and peered out into the night sky, where she could see the brilliant flashes of searchlights sweeping back and forth in desperate search patterns. The attacking aircraft were invisible in the darkness, but their engines created a low rumble that seemed to shake the ancient stone walls of Schloss Adlerhorst. The first explosions came from the direction of the main gate, massive detonations that lit up the night sky and sent shockwaves rolling across the mountain peaks. Elena realized that this wasn't a random bombing raid. The attackers knew exactly what they were hitting, and they had come specifically for Schloss Adlerhorst. Shouting erupted in the corridors outside her room, as German personnel scrambled to respond to the attack. Elena could hear orders being barked in military German, the sound of boots running on stone floors, and the distinctive clatter of weapons being readied for combat.
This was the rescue operation Henderson had referenced in his message, but Elena quickly realized that it presented as many dangers as opportunities.
If the attacking force was successful in breaching the castle's defenses, Henderson might be killed in the fighting, or executed by his guards before he could be rescued. If the attack failed, German security would be heightened to the point where any future escape attempt would be impossible. Elena made a decision that would have terrified her if she had allowed herself time to think about it.
This chaos might represent her only chance to reach Henderson before he was transferred or killed. She had to act now while the German defenders were focused on the external threat.
She dressed quickly in the darkest clothing she had and gathered the few tools she might need. A letter opener that could serve as a weapon, the master key ring she had stolen from Unterscharführer Beck during dinner the previous evening, and the small mirror she could use to check around corners without exposing herself. The corridors were eerily illuminated by emergency lighting as Elena made her way toward the interrogation wing.
Most of the castle's personnel had been deployed to defensive positions, but she still had to avoid several patrols of guards moving toward the areas under attack. The route to the detention cells required her to cross the main courtyard where she could see the full scope of the assault. Royal Air Force bombers were systematically destroying the castle's outer defenses, while what appeared to be glider-borne troops had landed on the surrounding mountainsides. The attackers were clearly trying to create multiple threats that would stretch the German defenders thin. But Elena also noticed something that filled her with dread. The interrogation wing showed no signs of damage, and she could see additional guards being posted at its entrances. The German commanders were protecting their most valuable prisoners, even at the cost of weakening their outer defenses. Reaching the interrogation wing required Elena to use every skill she had learned during 2 years of resistance work. She avoided patrols by timing their movements, used shadows and doorways to remain invisible, and twice had to hide in storage rooms while guards hurried past her position. The security doors that normally protected the detention area had been locked down in response to the attack, but Beck's stolen keys proved their worth. Elena moved carefully through the soundproofed corridors, checking each cell until she found the one marked with the number 7. General Henderson was awake and sitting calmly on his cot, as if he had been expecting exactly this development. When Elena appeared at his door, he showed no surprise, only the slight smile of a man whose plans were proceeding as anticipated. "I was wondering when you might visit," he said quietly as Elena unlocked his cell door. "Though I confess I didn't expect quite so much noise." "Can you travel?" Elena asked, stepping into the small cell. "Are you injured?" "Tired and hungry, but functional." "You're not German, are you? The accent is good, but your body language is all wrong." Elena made a quick decision to trust him with the truth, or at least part of it. "I'm Italian resistance." "I came to get you out." Henderson's smile widened slightly. "Italian resistance doesn't have the resources for an operation like this," he said, gesturing toward the sounds of battle outside. "But I suspect you didn't come alone, even if you didn't know it." "What do you mean?" "My escape was arranged before I was captured. A contingency plan in case something went wrong during my inspection tour." "The attack tonight is a joint operation between ARAF Special Forces and the American OSS, but the plan required someone on the inside to locate me and get me out of the detention area." Elena stared at him in shock. "You knew I was coming?" "Not specifically, no. But I knew someone would come. When I saw you yesterday, I realized you might be my contact." "You were far too observant for a translator, and you asked the right questions." The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. Her desperate mission hadn't been the suicidal improvisation she thought it was. Somehow she had become part of a larger operation that she never knew existed. "We need to move," Henderson continued, standing and testing his balance after days of confinement. "The attack is designed to draw defenders away from this wing, but it won't last forever. Do you know the way out?" Elena led him through the corridors she had memorized during her brief time in the castle. The sounds of fighting were growing more intense, with automatic weapons fire now audible along with the explosions. The RAF assault was clearly succeeding in creating chaos, but Elena could also hear orders being shouted to seal the castle and conduct a systematic search for infiltrators. They had almost reached the main level when they encountered the first patrol. 3 SS guards were moving methodically through the interrogation wing, checking each room and corridor. Elena heard them coming just in time to pull Henderson into an empty office, where they crouched behind a desk while the patrol passed by. "They're conducting a cell-by-cell search," Henderson whispered. "They'll find my empty cell within minutes. Then we need to get out of this wing before they sound the alarm." But as they moved toward the exit, Elena heard the one sound she had been dreading. The harsh blare of klaxons indicating that Henderson's escape had been discovered.
Almost immediately, she could hear reinforcements running toward their position. "This way," Henderson said, taking the lead for the first time. "There's an old service tunnel that connects to the main keep. The castle's medieval builders created it as an escape route for the original lords." Aelin didn't ask how he knew about a tunnel that probably wasn't on any modern plans. Military intelligence gathering was Henderson's specialty, and he had clearly used his time in captivity to learn everything he could about the castle's layout. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a loose stone in the wall of a storage room. Henderson worked quickly to remove the stone, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. The space was barely wide enough for one person, and Elena couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. "It's about 200 meters to the main keep," Henderson explained as they squeezed into the tunnel. "From there, we can reach the outer walls through the wine cellars." The journey through the tunnel was a nightmare of claustrophobia and terror. The passage was so narrow that they had to move single file, crawling through sections where the ceiling dropped too low for walking. Elena could hear Henderson's labored breathing ahead of her, and realized that his imprisonment had left him weaker than he was willing to admit. But they could also hear sounds of pursuit behind them. The Germans had found the tunnel entrance and were following them through the ancient passageway. Elena could see flashlight beams reflecting off the rough stone walls and hear voices shouting orders in German. "There!" Henderson gasped as they reached the end of the tunnel. Wine cellar access. They emerged into a vaulted stone chamber lined with wine racks, though most of the bottles had been removed to make space for military supplies. Elena could see wooden crates marked with German military insignia stacked along the walls. "The external wall is through there." Henderson pointed toward a heavy wooden door at the far end of the cellar. "But we'll need to cross the courtyard to reach the outer defenses." Elena peered through a small window and saw that the courtyard was now brightly illuminated by flares dropped by the attacking aircraft. German defenders were moving in organized squads, setting up defensive positions and searching for infiltrators. Getting across that open space would be like running through a shooting gallery, but they had no choice. Behind them, Elena could hear their pursuers emerging from the tunnel. In minutes, they would be trapped between the search teams and the defenders in the courtyard. "Wait," Henderson said, studying the scene outside. "Look at the pattern of the explosions. The RAF is following a specific sequence designed to draw defenders toward the outer walls. In 30 seconds, there should be a diversionary attack on the north tower that will pull those guards away from our position." Elena watched in amazement as Henderson's prediction proved accurate. A series of explosions erupted from the north side of the castle, and she could see guards running toward the new threat, leaving a brief gap in the courtyard coverage. "Now," Henderson said. They ran across the open courtyard like sprinters, using the shadows cast by burning debris to hide their movement. Elena expected to hear shouts or gunfire at any moment, but somehow they reached the outer wall without being detected. The wall itself presented a new challenge. It was 20 feet high and topped with electrified wire, but Henderson led her to a section where the RAF bombing had created a gap in the defenses. They climbed through the rubble and found themselves on a narrow ledge overlooking the 1,000-foot drop into the valley below. "The extraction point is on the north ridge," Henderson said, pointing toward a barely visible mountain peak. "About 3 miles across, very difficult terrain." Elena looked at the route and felt her heart sink. Henderson was exhausted, weakened by his captivity, and they would be pursued by experienced mountain troops who knew the terrain intimately. 3 miles might as well have been 300. But then she heard something that changed everything. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the valley below. Elena had never seen a helicopter before, but she recognized the unique sound from intelligence briefings about new Allied equipment. "That's our ride," Henderson said with obvious relief. "Right on schedule." The helicopter rose from the valley like something out of a science fiction story, its rotors creating a downdraft that scattered snow and debris across the mountainside. Elena could see Allied markings on its fuselage and the faces of crew members scanning the castle walls for their targets. But the helicopter's arrival also triggered a massive response from the German defenders. Anti-aircraft guns that had been focused on the bombing raid now turned their attention to this new target, filling the air around the aircraft with explosive shells and tracer fire. The helicopter pilot displayed incredible skill, weaving between the mountain peaks to avoid the worst of the defensive fire, while maneuvering closer to the castle walls. Elena could see a rope ladder dropping from the aircraft's side, but reaching it would require them to climb down the outer face of the castle wall. "Can you make it?" Henderson asked, studying Elena's face. She looked at the drop, thought about everything she had been through to reach this moment, and realized that she hadn't come this far to fail now. "Let's go home, General."
The climb down the castle wall was the most terrifying experience of Elena's life, made worse by the sounds of gunfire and explosions all around them. But Henderson proved to be stronger than his appearance suggested, and together they reached the point where the helicopter's ladder swayed within reaching distance. Elena went first, grabbing the rope ladder as the aircraft hovered precariously close to the castle walls. Henderson followed a moment later, just as German troops appeared on the walls above them and opened fire. As the helicopter pulled away from Schloss Adlerhorst and turned toward the safety of Allied-controlled territory, Elena looked back at the medieval fortress one final time. The castle was burning in several places, its defenses were shattered, and she could see German personnel scrambling to restore order. But more importantly, she could see that her impossible mission had succeeded. General Henderson was free, his knowledge was safe, and the information that would have cost thousands of Allied lives would never reach German commanders. "How did you know?" she asked Henderson over the noise of the helicopter rotors. "How did you know someone would come for you?" Henderson smiled, and for the first time since his capture, he looked like the confident military commander whose reputation had made him a target for German intelligence. "Because I've learned something during this war," he said. "Sometimes the most impossible missions are accomplished by people who don't know they're impossible. Thank you, Elena Marchetti. You've just changed the course of history." As they flew toward freedom through the mountain valleys, Elena realized that Henderson was right. She had attempted something that military experts would have called suicide, but somehow she had succeeded. Not because she was specially trained or uniquely qualified, but simply because she had refused to accept that some things couldn't be done. Behind them, Schloss Adlerhorst disappeared into the alpine mists, and ahead lay the promise of Allied territory and safety. Elena had ventured alone behind enemy lines and freed a kidnapped general from maximum security. She had done the impossible, and she had lived to tell about it.
The war would continue for many more months, but General Henderson would be there to help plan the campaigns that would eventually bring victory. And somewhere in a small Italian village, Elena's family would learn that their daughter had accomplished something that would be remembered long after the last shots were fired. Some missions are impossible. Some people make them possible anyway. And sometimes, that makes all the difference in the world.
She ventured alone behind enemy lines and freed the kidnapped general from maximum security.